Welcome back to my garage. Last time we ended on me having lost the shims necessary to set axial clearance on the crankshaft on my engine, which is sitting over there, not here. I'll tell you why in a moment. I couldn't find any shims locally and I ordered some. This was Thursday. And of course they haven't arrived yet. This is Monday. Actually Monday night my kid got sick and I had to stay in with him all day. So this is Monday evening. Which is a good thing, because I can have a whiskey, which is not very often these days, as I'm working daytime out here. Anyways, I want to thank Tommy Rundqvist, because he contacted me and said he had the shims, and he's located in my nearest town in Sweden. I'm in Norway, but Sweden is a kilometer away. I went and picked them up Sunday, so thank you, Tommy Rundqvist, for the shims, the coffee, and the conversation. Thank you. This means we can assemble the engine now. The reason the engine is sitting there, not here, I'm not quite sure why I'm making a point of this. There's a laser cutter sitting here. I was cutting some action figures out of wood for my kids this weekend, and as this is set up already, I'm gonna cut some gaskets for that reed valve. It's not cut all the way through. And the paper is bulging a little bit here, and focus is probably not set perfectly. It's set probably a couple of millimeters too low. I'll give it another pass, a bit faster this time. I'll use a fan to give it some makeshift air assist. This has to be a focusing issue. I cut 6mm plywood with it this weekend. Pretty much as good as we can get it. I mean, I could just cut to the line here, but it's kind of annoying. Might be the ash creating kind of an insulating layer. I cut these pieces a couple of days ago. 6mm plywood. Like 4 or 5 passers or something, if I can remember correctly. No problem. Probably because the ratio of stuff coming from the air turning back into air when you burn it in wood is much higher than in this stuff. There's probably much more stuff that came from the earth, so to speak, which is left as ash, scattering the beam before it can hit the actual surface to cut it when it's digging in. That's probably the weirdest explanation for this you've ever heard, but I think it's right, in a way. The gaskets are cut. Next step is to set axial clearance. You want some axial clearance for the crankshaft. 0.2mm is probably a good rule of thumb, so that's what we're shooting for. You don't need much, but you need enough to account for the crank flexing at high RPM. If you're running a floating crank like I am, with 1 roller bearing and 1 ball bearing. If it's not floating, it will be fixed to the bearings regardless of how you shim it, and it won't be able to slide in and out of 1 or 2 sides while it's flexing. You see how when it flexes, it gets shorter. The ends gets pushed in. I've set up a dial indicator here. I'll push the axle all the way to one side. We're seeing about 0.47mm. 0.1mm shim on each side should bring it down to around 0.2mm. Almost forgot the shims. Or rather, I forgot the shim. Been several comments about the missing dowel pins. There was machined holes for dowel pins, but then the milling machine lost some steps while milling one of the case halves, and they got misaligned. It had to be realigned with a bar through the center, and then these surfaces had to be machined. So when the dowel pins line up, these don't line up. So that's why I should drill through when it's properly aligned and mount new dowel pins. I'm using this to align this surface, and I'm gonna mount this here to align this surface, and then everything should be nice and true and square. I'll have to incrementally tighten things. Yeah, dowel pins would be a great idea. It was the original intent to run dowel pins. Ooh. I was lucky. I'm out of fuel for the heater, which means if I stay here much longer, I'll freeze to death. I should be able to button this up, and we'll set ignition timing and stuff tomorrow, and then try to start it. I've been running a too large switch gap, 0.9 millimeters, and also 2 gaskets, which isn't ideal. I'm gonna replace that with this 0.5 millimeter aluminium spacer now, and some gasket goo. Let's see what the squish turned out to. .5 millimeters, perfect. Perfect. It's the next day. I went and got some fuel for my heater, so I'm not freezing to death. All that's left now is mounting the output sprockets and the ignition system. I want to give a huge thanks to John Sunderland and his small company Firepower Engineering for sending me one of his programmable CDI units. And this case said stator and flywheel. The flywheel is over there. Sent me a video where he was testing this, and it's capable of lethal ignition power. This fits my engine fine. Well, this doesn't. I will need to cut a taper in this to fit the shaft. And it's also too thick. Even with a taper, there won't be any threads left. So I have to thin it down some. This wouldn't really be a problem if it weren't for my lack of a 4-jaw chuck and my lack of outward grabbing jaws, like reversible jaws on my 3-jaw chuck. I can't hold this in the lathe. I can hold this, and I tried it, but it's impossible to get it running through. I'll machine up a jig of sorts, or maybe just do it in the mill and get this done. But for now, for this initial testing, we'll run with my original Selectra ignition. What I started out with, because I know this works, and it's a direct fit, because the engine was designed to run this ignition unit. I could keep on running this pre-mixed chainsaw fuel, which I've been using up until now for the gasoline testing. But if the engine starts working properly and I can't refrain myself from pushing it, this won't be good enough. A recipe for detonation. We'll need to run this stuff. The problem is I'm all out. I'll have to make some arrangements so that I can pick some up later. It's a 3-hour drive to the closest supplier. There's a machine tool supplier close to where the fuel supplier is. Might be I can arrange so that I can pick up a 4-jaw chuck for my lathe at the same time, if I'm lucky. Let's get this mounted, and then the engine mounted in the dyno frame, and make everything ready for tomorrow, when we'll have fuel and can start testing. We'll have to confirm ignition timing with a light with this unit, because the instructions are really weird. There's a mark on the rotor. If you match that up with this mark on the stator, that's where it's firing. And there's a curve here, but nowhere does it state where on that curve the base timing is. It's starting at 7 degrees. Then it suggests setting your ignition timing between 2 and 2.4 millimeters for a 50cc engine. 2 millimeters before top dead center in this engine is about 24 degrees. I have no clue how that relates to this curve. Is that 24 plus 7? Or is that 24 instead of 7? 24 plus 14? Like, where does it start? It's weird they didn't make that clear. Italians. I'll set it at 24 degrees and then we'll check with the light where it's starting and what's happening. This won't be an issue with this unit. Two millimeters before top dead center. That's 1, 2 millimeters, and then line up the mark. One, 2. Perfect. One, 2. Perfect. There's really no reason for this being curved. Picked up a small drum of Sunoco Supreme 115 octane leaded race fuel. Did not manage to find a late chuck, unfortunately. I'll have to order one. Try to get that oil properly mixed into the fuel. It's thick stuff. First test with the engine in a normal configuration. Normal reed valve mounted in a normal position, running on normal fuel with a normal ignition. A known ignition unit confirmed to rev to high RPM. We're gonna start it and see if everything behaves as it should. Then we're gonna check timing with the timing light and then adjust accordingly. As I'm not quite sure how the curve supplied with this unit corresponds to the base timing. We'll find that out now, if everything works. The timing mark seems to be sitting right at top dead center, which I find kind of odd. I've advanced it as much as possible without taking off the rotor and shifting it on the crankshaft. Around maybe 10 degrees before top dead center. It seemed to be still sitting at the same mark. Well, of course it's staying at the same mark. That's where it's firing. And that mark should move as RPM increases. we'll need a larger main jet. A 110 main jet. We'll switch that out to a 125 or 130 or something large to be on the safe side. We'll see how it behaves and then we'll raise the needle. It's probably the needle that's the problem, not the main jet. Just to be safe. 130. We'll see how that affects things first. Then we'll raise the needle. We'll have to raise the needle. Sitting at the absolute lowest position. Let's try the middle position. Middle position. I think it's due for a replacement. It served its purpose well though. Exceeding my expectations for it in this pretty unconventional application. Bearings are completely toast. Makes it wobble uncontrollably. Seems to be spinning fine, but you can see its shaft is bent and it's wobbling. Not just the drill, the shaft is bent also. Maybe having all of this flopping around in the breeze isn't such a good idea. What the hell is that noise? Oh, so my pop rivets, they've rattled loose. I've picked up a replacement for my starter motor. I'm gonna make some changes here because obviously it's not a great idea to have this considerable mass only supported by the axle. Don't think I pressed record. I had a slight brain fart when playing with the ignition yesterday. Of course, these two lines always line up. If I want to adjust static timing and have a reference, I need to put a reference on the case and on the stator. But I've confirmed with a micrometer now that when these two lines line up, the line on the rotor and the line on the stator, it's sitting at 24 degrees. And according to the curve supplied with the ignition unit, it should retard from that down to around 19 at 14,000. Not much. I'm switching this out for the other unit to have some more adjustability, but just to see if the engine works. I'll heat up the coolant and we're ready for a test run. Now with the needle in the middle position and a 130 main jet. It's dying at around 50% throttle opening. Let's try making the needle even richer. I'll set it at the richest position. Choking it just the right amount with my hand helps. That creates lower pressure in the carb and a stronger signal at the jets, pulling up more fuel. We could try restricting the carb with a filter, but let's try a much larger main jet first, just to see what happens. Replacing the 130 jet with a 158 jet. It's a huge step, but all I'm trying to do now is to make it not die, but to gurgle, just to make sure it can get enough fuel. I want to get it to 4-stroke at full throttle. That's my goal now. I'm removing the jet altogether. If it doesn't 4-stroke at full throttle now, we'll need to add a restriction to create higher suction at the jets. Running better with no main jet at all, but still going lean at full throttle. We'll have to add a filter, restrict the carb, create lower pressure in the bore so it will suck up fuel better. I'll mount this and we can adjust the restriction with some duct tape around it. Not ideal, but for testing purposes. Let's put that main jet back in there. Reinstalling the 158 main jet. Let's see what happens with a little bit of restriction. I'm ready to take drastic measures now. Switch out to this tiny 21mm carb for testing. But I noticed something. This is the intake for the 21mm carb, and it has this embedded O-ring thing. Looking at this intake, it's missing that sealing O-ring thing. I wonder if we've been experiencing a major intake leak with this carb. That would explain the lean condition and weird behavior. I've already got this hooked up, so let's try with the 21mm carb and this intake, which should create a better seal. Let's try a smaller main jet in this one. It's not bogging down. I'm running out of SD cards, so I'll bring you back when I've changed out the main jet. 70mm main jet, from 85 to 70. My selection of main jets for this carb is really limited. That's why the huge jump. We know now that 85 is too much fuel, 70 is too little, somewhere in between. Unfortunately, I haven't got jets in that range. I found a local shop with some jets in stock. 85 was too large, 70 too small, and now I got a selection of 72, 74, 76, 82 and 84. The 82 is installed. Let's see how it behaves. This will make or break the video, cause I'm almost done editing and this is the last piece of the puzzle. Will this be a success story or a tragedy? It's always a comedy. Okay, and I've actually tried this carb again off camera with a gasket on this intake, which I suspected was leaking. No leaking with the gasket, but no difference either, so that was not our problem. Two is still too large. Let's hope 76 isn't too small, because that's my next step. All I've got. Let's try a 74. I think we're struggling with the pipe fighting the engine hump again. Let's give it some more timing. Couple of degrees more, 26, 27 degrees before top dead center. I think the problem is it needs to be lean enough to get over that hump, but then that becomes too lean. This is something we can fix with more timing. Can't do that with this ignition unit, because then we'll have too much timing up high and we'll melt the piston or stick the ring. Too much heat in the combustion chamber. This is already starting to look like that success story. We'll go back to the 76. It's probable that an 80 or something would have been better, but of course I haven't got anything in that size. let's call that a success story. It revs nicely. Probably needs much less timing up high to rev even more. And our issues are probably fuel related. Fuel and timing related. Mostly fuel, it seems. It just needs a little bit of help from a more fuel enriched atmosphere, and then it gets going. See you next time.